Everybody, Tom here. It's time for another weekly Bible study. We're going to be in John chapter 18. We're going to give people who are here live a couple of minutes to join up. You might want to skip ahead if you're watching on the replay. Oh, hey there, Amanda and Romana. Good to see you guys. Looks like I think the notifications are starting to go out. Hey there, Carrie. Hey, Heather. Glad you could make it. And Barbara. You guys about done? How's your Christmas shopping coming? You getting close to being done? I'd probably like 65%. I have nothing for Thomas. He's hard to buy for. He's like his dad. And Asher is too. Haven't even started. Well, I don't feel so bad. 90% done. That's pretty good. I don't feel so scared that I'm only not done yet. Yeah, Claudia wasn't feeling very good, but she's pretty much better now. So that's good. Judah actually got sick and he was really hit hard and had a fever, was in bed like day and a half, but he's back to being a little better now. So this weekend you're going to start. Nice. I keep getting a false sense of how late it is. I keep feeling like Christmas is next week, but I guess it's not, obviously. But I keep thinking I'm more behind than I am. I think I'm probably shopping earlier than I normally do too. So yep. Claudia keeps wanting to play Taco Cat Goat Cheese Pizza for our family game night, which is a game where everybody slaps their hands in the middle, but it sounds like that's a sickness spreading thing. It's already hard enough in a big family to not have the sicknesses go everywhere. Although we do manage pretty well. Every time there's a sickness, there's always a few people that don't get it. So I'm hoping to keep that going. Okay, well, we are going to get started. It hasn't been a long time for a live game night. Maybe we should do that again soon. That was kind of fun to do. Okay, well, we're going to go ahead and get started. We're going to be in John chapter 18. We're going to play it and follow along, and then we'll go back and talk about it, or I'm going to talk about it. But I love it when you guys talk. I love it. So if you guys have things you want to say, um, just because I've read it a lot, I have my own opinions, but it's not like there's a right and a wrong way. So the people that wrote these things down have been dead for hundreds and hundreds of years, thousands of years even. And so it's not always clear exactly what they meant or what they were saying. So when a preacher comes down and says, this is what Jesus meant, sometimes it can be pretty obvious, but a lot of times it's not, especially with the words of Jesus. So that doesn't mean we always get it right at all. And we may have a pretty good guess. I'm going to tell you what I think, but sometimes it takes a new set of ears, and maybe you hear it in a way that nobody's ever heard before, and maybe that's the obvious way. When Jesus was originally saying all these things, he was talking to uneducated people who didn't go to seminaries or seminars or read articles or books or sermons. They were just regular people, and so we can understand it as regular people. You don't need to be a theologian. So, and the more you read, the more familiar you get with these things, and it becomes easier to understand. Let's see here. John 18. Okay, here we go.
John 18. When he had finished praying, Jesus left with his disciples and crossed the Kidron Valley. On the other side there was an olive grove, and he and his disciples went into it. Now Judas, who betrayed him, knew the place because Jesus had often met there with his disciples. So Judas came to the grove, guiding a detachment of soldiers and some officials from the chief priests and Pharisees. They were carrying torches, lanterns, and weapons. Jesus, knowing all that was going to happen to him, went out and asked them.
Who is it you want?
Jesus of Nazareth!
They replied.
I am he.
Jesus said. And Judas the traitor was standing there with them. When Jesus said, I am he, they drew back and fell to the ground. Again he asked them,
Who is it you want?
and they said,
Jesus of Nazareth.
I told you that I am he.
Jesus answered.
If you're looking for me, then let these men go.
This happened so that the words he had spoken would be fulfilled.
I have not lost one of those you gave me.
Then Simon Peter, who had a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's servant, cutting off his right ear. The servant's name was Malchus. Jesus commanded Peter,
Put your sword away. Shall I not drink the cup the Father has given me?
Then the detachment of soldiers with its commander and the Jewish officials arrested Jesus. They bound him and brought him first to Annas, who was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, the high priest that year. Caiaphas was the one who had advised the Jews that it would be good if one man died for the people. Simon Peter and another disciple were following Jesus. Because this disciple was known to the high priest, he went with Jesus into the high priest's courtyard, but Peter had to wait outside at the door. The other disciple, who was known to the high priest, came back, spoke to the girl on duty there, and brought Peter in.
You are not one of this man's disciples, are you?
The girl at the door asked Peter. He replied,
I am not.
It was cold, and the servants and officials stood around a fire they had made to keep warm. Peter also was standing with them, warming himself. Meanwhile, the high priest questioned Jesus about his disciples and his teaching.
I have spoken openly to the world.
Jesus replied.
I always taught in synagogues or at the temple where all the Jews come together. I said nothing in secret. Why question me? Ask those who heard me. Surely they know what I said.
When Jesus said this, one of the officials nearby struck him in the face.
Is this the way you answer the high priest?
He demanded.
If I said something wrong,
Jesus replied.
testify as to what is wrong. But if I spoke the truth, why did you strike me?
Then Annas sent him, still bound, to Caiaphas the high priest. As Simon Peter stood warming himself, he was asked,
You are not one of his disciples, are you?
He denied it, saying,
I am not.
One of the high priest's servants, a relative of the man whose ear Peter had cut off, challenged him.
Didn't I see you with him in the olive grove?
Again Peter denied it, and at that moment a rooster began to crow. Then the Jews led Jesus from Caiaphas to the palace of the Roman governor. By now it was early morning, and to avoid ceremonial uncleanness, the Jews did not enter the palace. They wanted to be able to eat the Passover. So Pilate came out to them and asked,
What charges are you bringing against this man?
If he were not a criminal,
they replied.
we would not have handed him over to you.
Pilate said,
Take him yourselves and judge him by your own law.
But we have no right to execute anyone.
the Jews objected. This happened so that the words Jesus had spoken, indicating the kind of death he was going to die, would be fulfilled. Pilate then went back inside the palace, summoned Jesus, and asked him,
Are you the king of the Jews?
Is that your own idea?
Jesus asked.
Or did others talk to you about me?
Am I a Jew?
Pilate replied.
It was your people and your chief priests who handed you over to me. What is it you have done?
Jesus said,
My kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jews. But now my kingdom is from another place.
You are a king, then?
said Pilate. Jesus answered,
You are right in saying I am a king. In fact, for this reason I was born, and for this I came into the world, to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me.
What is truth?
Pilate asked. With this, he went out again to the Jews and said,
I find no basis for a charge against him. But it is your custom for me to release to you one prisoner at the time of the Passover. Do you want me to release the King of the Jews?
They shouted back,
No! Not him! Give us Barabbas!
Now Barabbas had taken part in a rebellion.
Okay, so that is chapter 18. Hey there, Kelsey. I'm glad you can make it. And Aaron, good to see you. And Melody, good to see you guys. Okay. Well, so up to now, Jesus has been talking to his disciples, giving them their last minute instructions and praying for them and all that. And this is finally passed, and this now comes the time where he's arrested and is going to have to be crucified. I actually really like the whole interaction of Jesus and Pilate. I actually find more interesting that interaction these days than the crucifixion. The crucifixion, while of course very important to us, it's kind of cut and dry. He says a couple things on the cross that I still think are interesting to think about. But there's a lot of things he says here to Pilate and back and forth. The Pilate says to him that I find very fascinating. And I guess we'll get into it. I don't know how far we'll get here today, so I doubt we get this whole chapter done today. So, so I thought he was Olive Grove, and him disciples went into it. This is probably, no, it's Olive Grove, yeah. Well, this is probably the Mount of Olives on the other side of the valley, which would have been, Mount of Olives, most likely. I think it says that in one of the other Gospels. Now, Judas knew the place because Jesus often met there with his disciples. So he came to the grove, guiding a detachment of soldiers and some of the officials of the chief priests and Pharisees. They were carrying torches, lanterns, and weapons. I find that interesting visually. That has become the movie picture of what a riot is. You got to have torches, lanterns, and weapons. You think everything from like Frankenstein's monster or to all these other movies where there's a big riot, and they all are doing that. And of course, that's because it's interesting that they were coming with weapons and torches like they're going to burn and pillage. And they were just going to get a preacher. Aaron O'Brien says, is that why people say extend an olive branch? Somewhere on the line, olive branch became to mean a thing of peace. But you're probably right. I think you see that symbol sometimes. Remember, there's in Noah in the ark. There's the dove that is carrying an olive branch in his mouth, and that's supposed to be a symbol that the water had gone down. I think it probably comes from that symbol. My guess is, but it'd be interesting to research it out. I don't think it's because of this particular part, but there is a correlation, I think, there. Lightsabers, right? That would have been perfect for a riot, right? Jesus, knowing all that was going to happen to him, went out and asked them, "Who is it you want?" This part's only in John here, by the way. Jesus of Nazareth, they replied. Oh wait, we haven't. No, actually, I take it back. We haven't got there yet. Maybe that's in Luke, or maybe it's in the next chapter. No, it must be in Luke. I am he. And Judas the traitor was standing there with him. When Jesus said, no, this is the part. When Jesus said, I am he, they drew back and fell to the ground. So this is the only part where this part is mentioned, which is interesting. And it just goes to show you that there's a lot of sides to a story. If we didn't have the Gospel of John, we would never know this little thing. It makes you wonder what else happened that we didn't know about. Things we would find very interesting, I'm sure. Maybe someday, I like to imagine that someday when we go to heaven, we can go back and watch these things. But who knows? That would be cool, wouldn't it? Again, he asked them, "Who is it you want?" And Jesus said, "Jesus of Nazareth." So again, they're all coming to him with torches and weapons and like a rioting. We want Jesus of Nazareth. And he says, "Who is it you want?" And they say, "Jesus of Nazareth." And they all fall down. That's got to be ominous, right? If you're going to lynch somebody and threaten them, and all of a sudden you just say his name and you all fall down, that's some scary stuff. Again, he asks, "Who is it?" Jesus of Nazareth. "I told you, I am he. If you're looking for me, let these men go." And I like to think, what I personally think, I don't know this, but what I like to think is that Jesus showed some of his power here in a more forceful way. If you recall, he's not done anything like this. He's always done his miracles to impress, to show that he's the Son of God, raise the dead, walk on water, these types of things. And here he knocks a bunch of guys on their butts, men with weapons and swords. And so now they're probably scared to death. And so he says, "If you're coming for me, you let these guys go." And they're like, "Okay," because they were probably pretty scared at this point, and so they let him go. And he wanted to protect his disciples. I want to look this up because I don't think I know that there's a passage. This is probably a psalm somewhere. This happened so the words had spoken, he had spoken, the words he had spoken. "I have not lost one of those you gave me." Do we have a record of him saying that? There's another place where it says in one of the New Testament epistles, letters, that Jesus said something like, the blessed command that Jesus gave, it is more blessed to give than to receive. And of course, if you go back and read all the Gospels, you'll not find any record of Jesus saying it's more blessed to give than receive, although apparently he did. So there's still, again, even more pieces of the puzzles there we don't have. But I want to look that up and see if it's actually referenced there. This is in John 18:9. This one's got a lot more references here. Oh, John 6:39. "This is the will of him who sent me, that I shall lose none of all that he has given me." Okay, but we'll raise him up at the last day. Um, hmm. When did that happen? "I am the bread of life, and this is the will of him who sent me." I still wonder if that's the exact spot that it's mentioned. It fits, but that doesn't fit awesomely. Yep, I don't think I recall any place. He calms the storm. Could you think of any place where Jesus sort of attacks people? He doesn't hurt these guys, obviously, but he throws them all to the ground. So I just think that it gives you goosebumps. It gives me goosebumps to think about. That'd be really fun to watch, and especially all these brave guys coming and yelling for his head. Of course, they still went with him. That's pretty crazy. Don't you think he could get away if he wanted to? Then Simon Peter, who had a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's servant, cutting off his right ear. The servant's name was Malchus. Jesus commanded Peter, "Put the sword away. Should I not drink the cup the Father has given me?" I find this one of the funniest scenes ever, because if you think about what Jesus had just said to them, I don't know if it says in John or is another gospel. I don't remember last time we talked about it, but there was a place where Jesus tells them, "Before I sent you off and told you, don't bring anything, don't bring any food, don't bring any clothes, don't bring anything when you're going out to these towns. But now I tell you, if you don't have a sword, sell your cloak and buy a sword." So he just finished telling Peter, "Buy a sword." And Peter's like, "There are two swords right here." He's like, "Those are enough." And he's like, "Yeah, it's time." Peter, the overzealous, crazy guy. Well, I don't say crazy, but he's a very gruff, rough type guy. And he's like, "All right." So he straps his sword on, and here they come. And he starts swinging his sword. And Jesus is like, "Peter, no swords." And he's like, "What? You just told me, Jesus." And I just think that that's such a fun little thing to happen. And of course, Jesus isn't saying they needed the swords for this, to prevent him from dying on the cross. And that's what he basically says. "Should I not drink the cup the Father has given me?" That means I'm here to do what the Father told me I came to do. So this isn't what you needed the swords for. It makes you wonder what they did need the swords for. Because even in Acts, you don't see them attacking anybody with swords. So, who knows? With references to things we don't have, is that further proof there are more missing books than we originally thought? No, no, I don't think that there are necessarily. Well, I mean, maybe there are missing books. I don't think so. I think we have everything, everything that's mentioned. I think that there's just people that didn't write things down. It's funny that there's all these things that are in the Bible, and we automatically think, I do too, that if it happened, we should have record of it. And there's even some prophecies that I'm looking at that you can't find record of, and that should have happened around that time. And I think, and some people I talk to say, well, I find no record of it happening, so it must not have happened. So it doesn't mean that at all. It just means that we don't have this information. And if you think about it, you think about something that's happened in your life, maybe something traumatic that's happened in your past. If you didn't have the story, if you were just telling a story about it after you're dead, who's going to know that that story ever existed, right? Maybe you wrote it down somewhere. Maybe there's an email somewhere with your name on it. Maybe you wrote it down or told somebody else who will tell the story again incorrectly. I think about that all the time with Andrea. She tells me stories, and I tell the kids my version of the stories that she told me, and I know I get them wrong. So it's not uncommon to know. I think that there's just things that we will never have and probably were never written down at all. So it's okay that we don't have it all. We're lucky to have what we have. Would you be a Christian still if you only knew what Jesus did and you didn't have all these details? Of course, God gave us the Bible and these words and protected the words I believe that he wanted us to have. There are other gospels, Gospel of Thomas, a couple others. I think there's a Gospel of Judas, maybe even. There's a writing supposedly by Judas. But there's a good reason to doubt a lot of those things. They're usually pretty recent and not very old. So probably not written by the people that were actually alive at that time. Is it possible they did write them? Yeah, maybe. But I'm not really looking for any lost works myself. But I do think it's fun to see some of these pieces that maybe we don't have and just kind of imagine. I think what we do have has been very sharpened and pointed, these words, the ones that God wanted us to have. I mean, there's a lot of other fun ones, but he didn't give us any of those. So we just got to make do with what we have for now. So yeah, so Peter's striking out with the sword after Jesus just told him he's going to need it. And Jesus is already going back, and I'm sure Peter's all confused. But again, you think anybody else wanted to fight? You think all the disciples didn't want to get rid of all those guys? Yet Peter's the only one, in my opinion, brave enough. Of course, he wasn't supposed to do this, but none of them knew that. And I think Peter's awesome here for being brave. Obviously, if he was closer and walking in the will of Jesus, he wouldn't have done it at all. But I still give him credit for his bravery. Whole herd of people, and Simon's going to fight him with his one sword all by himself. Then the detachment of soldiers with its commander and the Jewish officials arrested Jesus. They bound him and brought him first to Annas, who was the father of Caiaphas, the high priest that year. Caiaphas was the one who advised the Jews it would be good for one man died for his people, the people. That's back in John 11, where he said that that he prophesied that year that Jesus would die for the Jewish people and that he would gather together the children of God and make them one. And I believe that's what we see happen as a result of his crucifixion. And a lot of people might see that in a different way. There's a verse about him gathering people in Matthew 24. But here we have again in John 11, they would gather them together and make them one. The whole point is, what did Paul say? Paul said he has broken the barrier down between Jew and Gentile, the dividing wall of hostility. And so there are no more two, but one. Glad you guys are still awake. So, yes. So, and it's interesting because Caiaphas is obviously not necessarily a good man at all, but he's not a bad man. He thinks that he's honoring God, but he's clearly completely sold over to Judaism and missing the Christ. And so he's bad, but at the same time, John here is putting his story in because what he said was true. Jesus would die for the people. Simon Peter and another disciple were following Jesus. Because this disciple was known to the high priest, he went with Jesus to the high priest's courtyard. So this is another reference here, most likely to the writer of this gospel, which is John the Apostle. There's a lot of reasons, speculation as to why John never mentions himself by name. You never hear himself mention John. In fact, it usually says the disciple whom Jesus loved, or he says, "This is the disciple that leaned back against him on his breast and said, 'Who betrayed you?' This is the disciple that wrote these things down." And this one says, "This disciple was known to the high priest." So, I mean, the most common reason that they would give why John maybe did this is because he didn't feel worthy. He didn't want to be bragging or putting his name in the limelight. So he wanted to have humility, and so he doesn't mention himself by name because he wants the glory to go to Jesus. I'm glad you're liking it, Amanda. So yeah, we're going to continue to have reference here. So Simon Peter, and we're going to just say John, are following Jesus. If you look somewhere else, and in Luke, I believe it says all the disciples scattered and disappeared. Obviously, they didn't all, because here we are with Simon and John following along Jesus. And you think that Peter was like, "Ha! I showed Jesus," because again, what did he say? I'll go to death with you. And he says, "You're going to betray me." He says, "I will not betray you. You know, I'll go to death with you." And so here, 5 minutes later, this big crowd of people come up and are attacking with swords, and all the disciples flee. And I'm sure Peter's like, "I'm not going to flee. I'm not going to betray Jesus." And so he goes on with them. And of course, ends up, fulfilling what Jesus said and, disowning him, but not really. Um, Anyways, so they're following over into the high priest courtyard. And again, what they're doing here is they can't take Jesus to Rome because Jesus didn't do anything wrong. The only people that are going to think that Jesus did something wrong are the Jews, because he claimed to be God. He claimed to be the Christ. He said all these things. He said, "I am. I was before Abraham." He claimed all these things, and to them, that makes him worthy of stoning. But they technically couldn't have Rome kill them, and I believe they did not want to kill him. And you'll see this we went through Acts already, but there's a place in Acts, this guy Caiaphas, who ends up killing Jesus, and well, I say he killed Jesus. He orders them to take him to Rome and to, hand him over to Rome. And when the disciples start going around the city and saying that the Jews killed Jesus, even though the Romans obviously were the ones that did it, the Jews killed Jesus and the high priest killed Jesus. When the disciples go before the high priest, he says, "You filled Jerusalem with his teaching and are determined to make us guilty of this man's blood." Like, we didn't kill Jesus, it was the Romans. But of course, they're the ones that ordered his death. Just like in the story of David and Bathsheba, God held David accountable for the murder of Uriah the Hittite, Bathsheba's wife, because he used the sword of the Ammonites to do it. Even though the Ammonites were just defending their home and were fighting the Jews, God said David's the one that murdered him by the hand of the Ammonites. And so this is the same way. The Jews killed Jesus by the hand of the Romans. So anyways, that's Caiaphas. This is the guy. He's a snake. But Peter had to wait outside the door. So what this is saying is that the high priest, or the guy outside the temple or the high priest courtyard, knew who John was. And I find that interesting by itself. Why did they know who John was and they didn't know who Peter was? What is John's background? John was apparently pretty young. And so why they knew John is just an interesting, I wonder why. But Peter had to wait outside. The other disciple, again, John, who was known to the high priest, came back, spoke to the girl on duty, and brought Peter in. So he's like, "Hey, let Peter in. Let that guy in. Bring him in." And she's the one now who says, "You're not one of his disciples, are you?" And Peter says, "I'm not." Because, again, he's about to walk through security. And they're like, "Are you one of his disciples? You're not one of his disciples, are you?" And he's like, "No, nope, I want to go in." So he says, "Nope, I'm not one of his disciples." And of course, this is one of the 3 times he betrays Jesus. But did he really betray Jesus? Is that where his heart actually was? Did he actually betray Jesus? No, I don't think he did. Obviously, Jesus said, "You would betray me." And yes, he's saying it, so he's betraying him in that way. Actually, I believe the word is translated disown, but I wonder what the Greek actually is. I'm not actually sure. And no matter though, Jesus didn't, crucify him for it. He told him, when you have turned back, strengthen your brothers. So he knew he was going to be sad for what he's done here. But again, he's just trying to see Jesus. I don't hold it against him at all. Um, I've had this conversation about lying many, many times. A lot of people say, is lying wrong and is lying a sin? And the commandment they'll quote a lot of times is not to bear false witness against your neighbor. But if you go back and look at what that bear false witness is, the ninth commandment, it's actually talking more of a court type scenario where it's like they needed 2 or 3 witnesses to punish somebody back then to convict them. So to bring, and you see several times in the Old Testament where they bring false witnesses, 2 or 3, to condemn him and say he's cursed the king, and then he goes and gets him killed. That's what it means to bear false witness, to lie about somebody in a court situation. It's not saying not lying in general, because we have lots and lots of people lying. And, like Samson lied about the secret of his strength to protect his strength. Abraham lied about Sarah being his sister. Jacob lied about who he was to his brothers. There's a bunch of lies in the Bible, and they're not necessarily always bad. I guess it comes back down to, again, the attitude of your heart. I've used the explanation, if your wife tells you, do I look fat in this dress? And she does, you can say no. You don't have to say, oh, got to tell you a lie. You're a fatty. You don't have to say that. You can say, no, you look beautiful in that, because, it's, again, go back down to the attitude of your heart. And so I don't see Peter as actually being malicious or evil here. He just wants to get in and see what's going on with Jesus. So it was cold, and the servants and the officials stood around a fire they had made to keep warm. Peter also was standing with them, warming himself. Meanwhile, the high priest questioned Jesus about his disciples and his teaching. It's funny they're asking about his teaching, because again, they are not allowed to convict somebody by Jewish law, by the Old Testament law, just on hearsay, meaning that somebody said something about this guy. It has to be either proven, they have to say it to his face, or you need 2 or 3 witnesses that can all testify he said the same thing, and they have to agree. And so they're asking everybody about his teaching to try to see if they can get 2 people to say he said something blasphemous at the same time. So, I have spoken openly to the world, Jesus replied. I always taught in synagogues or at the temple where all the Jews come together. I said nothing in secret. Why question me? Ask those who heard me. Surely they know what I said. And so, and of course, he's right. He wasn't hiding from anybody. He always spoke in the open. When Jesus said this, one of the officials nearby struck him in the face. Is this the way you answer the high priest? He demanded. If I said something wrong, Jesus replied, testify as to what is wrong. But if I spoke the truth, why did you strike me? I think this is I love this little thing here, because nearly the exact same thing happens to Paul when he goes before these same people. And so when Paul is before them and Paul says something, again, truthful, they come and strike him in the face. And Paul says, God's going to strike you, you whitewashed wall. And then they say, are you dare speak in that way to God's high priest? And then as soon as they said that, Paul says, oh, I'm so sorry, guys. I did not mean to speak against the high priest. The Bible says not to talk against the leader of the people. And so he apologizes. Jesus don't apologize. And he doesn't say anything terribly evil or bad or, mean to them, but he puts them back in their place. He doubles down on it. He struck him in the face. Is this the way you answer the high priest? You're embarrassing the high priest. That's what this really is. What did Jesus say? I spoke in public. Why are you asking me? He didn't say anything wrong. He's just telling the truth. But of course, it was embarrassing to the high priest, because again, they have to get 2 or 3 witnesses, and they're asking Jesus what he did wrong. So go ask the other people. See what they said. But what does he say? He doesn't apologize for talking to the high priest. He says, if I said something wrong, testify as to what is wrong. But if I spoke the truth, why did you strike me? I love it. I love it. Jesus is not scared. He's not letting them push him around. Then Annas sent him, still bound, to Caiaphas the high priest. Okay, this is Annas. I guess it goes from Annas to Caiaphas. As Simon Peter stood warming himself, he was asked, "You are not one of his disciples, are you?" He denied it, saying, "I am not." One of the high priest's servants, a relative of the man whose ear Peter had cut off, challenged him, "Didn't I see you with him at the olive grove?" Again, Peter denied it, and at that moment, a rooster began to crow. So that's his three betrayals of Jesus. He would disown me three times. And again, he wasn't betrayed. So I mean, maybe we should look that up real fast. Was it in John 16? Let's see here. Well, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Let's see here. It doesn't say it here, but it says in Luke that when Peter denies him the third time and he hears the rooster crow, it says Jesus turns from wherever he is and looks right at Peter, and Peter goes out and cries. I mean, it's like, man, it's like, did Jesus hear that? That's just so powerful to see that, to think about that scenario when and I'm sure at that moment he's not thinking, "Oh, I'm denying Jesus." I'm sure he thought Jesus doesn't know about this. I'm sure he didn't hear me. And of course he turns and looks right at Peter and just convicted to the bone. But what's interesting is afterwards, when he rises from the dead, he asks Peter, "Do you love me?" He says, "Yes, I love you." Then he asks him again, "Do you love me, Peter?" He says, "Yes, I love you." And he says, "Do you love me, Peter?" And Peter says the third time, "Yes, I love you." But he's hurt because Jesus asked him three times, "What, you don't believe me?" But it's interesting that he denies Jesus three times, and then later on, Jesus makes him say that he loves him three times, and it's like he's redeeming himself. I just think that's a fun story. So then the Jews led Jesus from Caiaphas to the place of the Roman governor. By now it was early morning, and to avoid ceremonial uncleanness, the Jews did not enter the palace. They wanted to be able to eat the Passover. I find this whole sentence interesting because I cannot think of any place in the Old Testament where going into the Roman facilities would make them ceremonially unclean, so they couldn't eat Passover. In fact, I think it was Josiah in the Old Testament who gathered all the people, and they knew there were people that were unclean and they weren't doing it right. But he said, "God, please overlook the fact that we did this incorrectly because we love you and we wanted to do the Passover anyways." God forgives him and says it's all right. And so here they're going through great. They're like, "Oh, can't touch the building. Can't touch the building." And I'm not sure what law they could possibly be pointing to where it was even mentioned that to go inside of a Roman building would make you unclean. This kind of goes back to the idea that they thought if you had to wash the cup before you drank out of it, or you'd be unclean. There's several other things that they say made you unclean. And this, you can tell by how they react in Acts 10 with the story of Cornelius and the centurion, the Cornelius of them going into his house, the first Gentile to be saved, that later on Peter's accused, and he says, um, sorry, it distracted me. He goes in there and says, what was I going to say? Uh, oh, um, Later on, they testified that we saw you go into the house of uncircumcised men and eat with them. And they were accusing Peter as doing something wrong or evil about it. And Peter had to go and explain what happened. And they had to, so I think it's something like that. They thought that going into a place where there's Gentiles that are uncircumcised, going into their house would make them unclean. And it obviously that doesn't make anybody unclean. Jesus said it's out of the overflow of the heart the mouth speaks, and out of your mouth and out of your heart is the things that make you unclean. So Pilate came out to them. So again, if you don't know what's actually going on here, Pilate was the governor of Judea. So he was the Roman governor, and so he was over their place. But the Jews were there first, right? If you know the story, this is the land of Israel. This is Jerusalem, and yet when Rome conquers Israel, They move in and they set up shop there and they're occupying Israel. So the Roman soldiers, the Roman people are all within there, mingled in there, saying that this is our city. But at the same time, the Jews already had in place their own law, their own Sanhedrin, their own method of enforcing law and rules, and the Romans kind of let them do that. I believe in the old, and if you remember the statue of Daniel, it says that the fourth kingdom is a kingdom of iron, and then the feet were iron mixed with clay, and iron is for Rome. And so I believe the clay in the statue is the land of Israel. That's the earth of Israel. So Israel's power was intermingled with Rome's power, and we can see that here. And so they first take them to Caiaphas, to their people, to see if they want to kill him. And then when they need it actually done, they take it to the Romans because they don't want Jesus' blood on their hands. Some people would say they don't have the authority to kill people, but of course they had no problem stoning Stephen or killing countless other people during the book of Acts. So I don't think that they cared about it. They only cared in Jesus' case because they wanted to deny that they were the ones involved with killing Jesus. So the Jews are bringing this guy, and they're handing him over and saying this guy's a bad guy, and Pilate doesn't know what's going on. And the Jews to him are nothing but troublemakers. And so he says, "What charges are you bringing against this man?" And they just say, "If he's not a criminal, we would never have brought him to you." Like they don't say anything about what he actually did. They don't have any accusation at all. They're just like, "We want you to kill him. If he weren't a criminal, we would not be bringing him to you, Pilate. Just kill the guy and let's be done with it." Thank you, Romana. So I just like that they have no crime. We don't know what he did. We know. I'm not going to tell you. Can't tell you. Just kill him anyways. And of course, Pilate's like, nope, that's not going to happen. So he says, take him yourselves and judge him by your own law. He says, you know that you have your own law. You guys have your own law. Go do that. And they already had, right? But it says, but we have no right to execute anyone, the Jews objected. This happened so that the words of Jesus spoken indicating the kind of death he was going to die would be fulfilled. That is, crucifixion is not a Jewish form of death. Jews stone people. Or, ironically, one of the ways they would do it is they would tie a man up and leave him to starve to death. Isn't that terrible? Because, again, in their mind, if God wanted to save the guy, he could have brought him food. He could have escaped. But, it's not their fault. They didn't murder him because I didn't murder him. He starved to death. So that's one of the ways they would do it. But anyways, they would stone people, which, of course, is killing people. But, of course, the Old Testament said to stone people. Here they're saying again, we have no right to execute anyone. But of course, when they stoned the woman, they were going to stone the woman caught in the act of adultery. They were going to stone Jesus 3 times. They stoned Paul. They beat him several times. They stoned Stephen to death. They kill James, is the brother of John, is killed. John the Baptist. Well, of course, John the Baptist was killed by Herod. But either way, they had no problem killing people. So when they say we have no right to execute anyone, that's technically true. They weren't allowed to do it, but Rome didn't do anything about it when they did it. So they looked the other way. They just didn't want. I sincerely believe with all my heart that they just wanted to be able to not have any effect. Because if he is the Messiah, we don't want to have killed him. And so I think that's what they're probably going to do. What? Not right now. I'm doing Bible study. Sorry about that. Well, we'll probably call it quits here pretty quick. Although we're almost done, aren't we? Oh, man. Well, actually, I think it's probably a good place to stop, actually. Take him and judge him by your own law. All right. Well, I think we'll probably call it quits right there. It's already a little. This is about where I want to call it quits. Is about 8:15 every night. So I still want to go out, and what we're going to do tonight. Tomorrow is St. Nicholas Day, which St. Nicholas is the character the real person that Santa is based off of. And we don't do Santa in our house exactly. We don't do it at all, but we do celebrate St. Nicholas Day sometimes. And the story of St. Nicholas was he would put gold. He would put coins in kids' shoes, and that's where we get the tradition about putting stuff in stockings. So the kids are gonna leave their shoes, and we got some chocolate coins. We're gonna put them in their shoes. So We haven't hooked the lines up. I'm way behind. I need more Christmas ornaments stuff, Christmas shopping. I have all kinds of stuff I got to do, but I haven't even finished the tree. But I appreciate all of you guys. Let's do a quick prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for this time, and thank you for this message and for these fun little things we can learn and see, and for getting a picture of what you did and how you responded to people, knowing when to use force with your words or otherwise and when not to. Help us to learn when to use a sword and when not, and to be people of peace and ones you can be proud of. In Jesus' name, amen. St. Nicholas is celebrating the Netherlands today. I guess you guys are across the date line, so it's like today is tomorrow for you guys, right? So that tomorrow, it's the 6th there. It's only the 5th here, so. All right, we'll see you guys later. I appreciate all you guys. You guys on the East Coast all still around? I'll see you later.